The first meeting I ever organized. I'd never organized a meeting. I'd never been in politics or any of that kind of stuff.
That was Jay Miller, a longtime plumber and engineer who is a resident of Geneva in rural Seminole County. What pulled Miller into politics and community organizing in early 2018 was a fear he shared with many of his neighbors in Seminole's rural east side that their surroundings were about to drastically change. Residents had long feared that sprawl would encroach into the county's less developed areas, so much so that Seminole voters more than a decade earlier had approved a measure that established a firm rural boundary, enacting building limits on roughly a third of the county. But Miller and others were spurred to action in response to a new project proposed for the rural area called Rivercross. Preliminary plans for the project pitched more than 1,000 homes and 1.5 million square feet of shops, restaurants, and office space. To oppose the project, Miller that May co-founded Save Rural Seminole, a citizen group dedicated to protecting the boundary. They expected to organize their fellow residents to attend public meetings and urge county staff and elected officials to hold the line and reject the project. However, it would soon become clear that opposing Rivercross would come at a far greater cost and involve butting heads with powerful interests. The project, after all, was being developed by Chris Dorworth, a former lawmaker turned influential lobbyist, and it was supported behind the scenes by allies like tax collector Joel Greenberg. That summer, Miller came under fire by a far-right political blogger named Jacob Engels, who wrote a post about an incident in which Miller had been arrested, but prosecutors declined to press charges. For Brian Butte, another co-founder of the citizen group, seeing his friend's photo under the headline "Save Rural Seminole Leader Arrested" was an eye-opening experience that presaged what was to come.
I had the idea that, wow, this is political, right? This is not just like a nice community effort, us getting together with hot dogs and, protecting a rural boundary. This was like, apparently dealing with some really big influences and money.
Around the same time, Miller, who worked for a military contractor, said he was told the company had received an anonymous letter falsely accusing him of other crimes.
It was, I think, mid-August of 18, and I was getting ready to deploy, and I had stepped down from Save Rural Seminole because I was going to be gone for 9 months. And I got a call from somebody that I worked with at the DOD, and he said, "We got this letter. It was anonymous. It said that I was a drug dealer and a multiple-time felon and multiple DUIs, etc." And it made a mess. I mean, I didn't deploy on time. It created problems with my job, and I had to basically show that I was not, the person that he claimed I was.
Miller can't prove who sent the letter, but soon after it arrived, he said he got a call from Engels, who offered to begin writing positive stories about Save Rural Seminole and its leaders on his blog, the Central Florida Post.
I don't know how he got my phone number.
There was a catch, according to Miller. Engels wanted $10,000.
And I told him that, I thought it was extortion. I would bring it to the board, because he kept saying I needed to bring it to the board. And I said, I'll bring it to the board, but I can tell you it's extortion and this is not going to fly.
Not long after, Butte was targeted with similar tactics. While Greenberg launched a behind-the-scenes smear campaign to tar Butte, a prep school teacher, as a segregationist and sex abuser, Engels would promote similar allegations in plain sight on his blog, the Central Florida Post.
Hello everyone, Jacob Engels with Central Florida Post, and we're doing a broadcast today talking about a very unfortunate, mentally ill individual, Brian Butte.
Hello and welcome to Joel Greenberg, the man, the scandal, the players. Brought to you by the Orlando Sentinel. I'm your host, Jeff Weiner. The clip you just heard was from a video Engels posted on Facebook on June 15, 2020. 8 days later, Greenberg was arrested on stalking and identity theft charges for having used anonymous letters and fake social media accounts in an effort to destroy Butte's reputation. The criminal case against Greenberg would grow to encompass 33 federal crimes before the former tax collector in May pleaded guilty to 6 of them, including stalking Butte. Greenberg, in a plea deal, agreed to cooperate with federal prosecutors who reportedly are examining everything from potential sex trafficking offenses by Congressman Matt Gaetz, a Greenberg ally, to potential public corruption in the medical marijuana industry. Engels is not facing any charges, and he has not been publicly implicated in the sprawling federal case. He declined a request for an interview or to answer detailed questions sent to him by the Orlando Sentinel. A criminal defense attorney he hired last year also declined to comment. But to the Save Rural Seminole leaders who attracted his ire, Engels' role in the smear campaign was clear as day.
Creepy Brian Butte. Creepy Brian Butte. Creepy Brian Butte. Creepy Brian Butte.
Hi, I'm Jay Miller. I had a speech all prepared to read tonight and drew it out because everybody else here that's wearing a green shirt and many that aren't even wearing green shirts are saying the same exact thing over and over. I'm a professional plumber. I have been a professional plumber and engineer for 26 years. This project, based on my calculations, will use 12 to 14 million gallons of water per month. That's not including landscaping. That's just regular water, and that's not including commercial. They have not demonstrated anything to this committee on where they're going to put that water once it's used. When you flush the handle, it's got to go somewhere. And their plan is to pump it across the river to a sewer treatment plant that's located on the other side. It does not make any sense to do that. There's no water, there's no schools, there's nothing out there for this. It does not make any sense to put it there. I ask you to vote no. Thank you.
That was Jay Miller addressing Seminole County's Planning and Zoning Commission in July 2018. He was one of a flood of residents opposed to River Cross who turned out to speak against the project, which was ultimately rejected by the advisory board unanimously. Engels soon after published a lengthy blog post arguing the rural boundary was a remnant of segregation that perpetuates white supremacy. That would later become the basis of a federal lawsuit against the county by Dorworth, which he filed after county commissioners followed the planning board's lead and rejected River Cross. The following February, Engels emailed Trinity Preparatory School, where Butte is a music teacher, claiming he was working on another blog post about the rural boundary. He framed his questions as though it was a given that defending the rural lines was tantamount to supporting racism. Here's our producer, Wesley Alden, reading a portion of Engels' email.
As one of your teachers is involved in opposing the removal of the racist rural boundary lines, I was wondering how your students, parents, teachers of color will feel about a TPS employee leading this pro-segregation group.
Butte was called to the head of school's office to explain.
You're sitting in front of your African-American boss here, having to try to explain like some of the background and what's going on out where I live in Chuliota. I mean, it's a half an hour away from where I work in Winter Park. So awkward, for sure. And, you know, I've led I would believe an exemplary career. And so I just joined this effort, which again, you know, felt like originally like just a really good, wholesome effort. And I started to realize it was definitely not going to be that at that point.
It would not be the last time Butte found himself in that position. As the year went on, Butte considered stepping beyond his community advocacy and into local politics. He said he initially considered a run for county commissioner, but determined he was satisfied with who was representing his community in that body. Meanwhile, he'd seen the steady drumbeat of scandalous headlines about the county's controversial tax collector, Joel Greenberg, an ally of Dorworth and first-term incumbent seeking re-election.
I pulled what they call a packet on the 27th of September 2019. So you go into the elections office and you grab a packet to learn like what it would take to run. And I was reading it over for about a week, and all of a sudden this Lauren Ritchie article comes out on October 4th, 2019, entitled, you know, tax collector gives $3.5 million to friends and whatever the title was. So that was it.
We talked about that article, the product of an investigation conducted by longtime Orlando Sentinel columnist Lauren Ritchie, way back in episode 3. She reported that Greenberg had by then doled out $3.5 million on more than a dozen outside consultants and new employees, including a lawyer once married to his aunt and 3 of his groomsmen.
That was sort of my breaking point where I said, okay, I have some skills, I have some experience, I'm not young, my kids are still in the home. My wife said, why don't you run while the kids are in the home? I was thinking maybe 4 years later, but why not run while your kids are in the home? Because they can see, they can feel, they can assist in this effort. And so it became a family effort.
Butte announced his candidacy for tax collector in early October 2019.
I think it was 2 weeks later, the 18th of October would have been a Friday afternoon, and I was summoned by the head of school's secretary. And anytime that happens in my profession, when a secretary comes to your room or a principal comes to your room, especially knowing that that doesn't happen to me like often, like ever, you wonder, like, you know, you as a family member, like ill, sick, in an accident, something.
He was greeted by 2 superiors. The door shut. That's when he learned that anonymous letters had been sent to the school, which purported to come from a very concerned student. They laid out, in graphic detail, horrifying allegations against the teacher, including that he had sexually abused a student at the school. Butte knew the claims were false. But he also knew his life had just been upended.
So alarm bells are going off in my mind, going, oh my gosh, I mean, what am I going to be facing when I go home tonight? Well, obviously, I have to tell my wife and my kids, but what am I facing? Like, am I facing, like, the media at my home? Am I facing, like, I'm in the dark. Like, who would do this to me, right?
Knowing that he was now facing a criminal investigation by the Seminole County Sheriff's Office, Butte volunteered to be placed on paid leave.
And it was a gut instinct, and I doubted myself for a long period of time. Why did I do that? You know, does that make me look guilty? But I'm not patting myself on the back, but I just knew that that would be a pressure that I should be taking off of my employer. So they didn't have to do that. And I don't know if that would have been their intention or not. I suspect not, but that was one of the 2 roughest times, I'd say, due to this crime in that span of time.
As soon as the meeting was over, Butte called David Baer, a Save Rural Seminole member and private practice civil attorney who's also a former prosecutor. Baer still remembers Butte's fear and confusion.
I could hear the pain in his voice and the concern, for his personal and professional life, and not knowing how this is all going to play out, because you don't know what's going to happen. So from that moment on, I was helping him to try to put together a strategy for how are we going to try to tackle this. Candidly, I asked Brian during our initial phone call, and I'll never forget that phone call, where I was. I asked him, I said, look, I used to be a prosecutor. I chose not to be a criminal defense attorney when I left the prosecutor's office. If you need a criminal defense attorney, I will absolutely hook you up with the right people. But I am not a criminal defense attorney. So you tell me what you need. If you need a criminal defense attorney, just let me know. And he told me, he said, I don't need a criminal defense attorney. I said, okay, well, I will do everything I can to help you out.
A native of Winter Springs, Baer had watched the urbanization of Seminole County spread for his whole life. With an active legal career, he didn't have much time to take on causes. But when he'd seen buzz growing online in early 2018 from residents eager to resist a major incursion into the rural area, Baer said he was motivated to enter the fray.
I don't know how I found time to go, because at the time I was working until midnight, 1 or 2 in the morning at my old law firm. But somehow I found time to go to the Planning and Zoning Committee hearing that Rivercross was in front of. And I took a card and said I wanted to speak on it. And I did. My name is David Baer. I've lived in Seminole County my entire life. I have 3 young children under 5 years old. I hope they love nature and natural wildlife as they grow up. I hope they want to live in Winter Springs or Seminole County, anywhere else, because they love that too, and Seminole County continues to embody that, as it does right now. It's been pointed out numerous times, that's what Seminole County markets itself as. That's what Seminole County in the past has attempted to embody. And I think it would be a grave mistake to deviate from that long-term historic plan that the county has had.
And after the meeting, I got a Facebook message from Brian. And he said, I heard you speak. I'm the president of this organization, Save Rural Seminole.
Bear would soon team up with Butte and Miller as prominent and vocal figures in Save Rural Seminole. But Bear repeatedly found himself having to act as a legal representative for his fellow movement leaders, as they faced barbs from Dorworth and Engels online. For example, Bear wrote a cease and desist letter to Dorworth after the developer launched a tirade against Miller on Save Rural Seminole's Facebook page in February 2019, bringing up the arrest that Engels had written about and calling him a useless criminal fraud. Days after the letters arrived at Butte's school that October, Engels again emailed Trinity Prep, this time asking for Butte's personnel file, including any complaints by students. To Bear, it was clear that Engels knew about the letters, the contents of which had not yet become public. In a series of detailed emails, Bear laid out to Seminole County Sheriff's Detective Jose Tirado the various attacks that Butte and others in Save Rural Seminole had faced, arguing that the letters to Trinity Prep were the latest element of a coordinated campaign to smear Butte.
I started talking with them to lay out the background and context for all of the Rivercross background, the Save Rural Seminole background, the development efforts, who are the people that have been threatening, Brian and other Save Rural Seminole, leaders in the past. They might be people who are suspects for who would make something like this up. Who are the people that have worked with those guys in the past? They would also be suspects, whether these are people that would be acting directly or through an intermediary like Mr. Engels.
As evidence of a connection between Dorworth and Engels, Bear noted to Tirado that he'd sent a cease and desist letter to Engels via certified mail on February 22, 2019, sending a copy to Dorworth's attorney via email that afternoon. Bear said his co-counsel received a threatening email from Engels that evening, far too soon for the letter to have arrived by mail. Dorworth, in a text message to the Sentinel, adamantly denied ever having worked with or paid Engels. Not long after the case began, Tirado confirmed that Butte was no longer considered a suspect. Seminole County investigators would eventually discover that Greenberg's DNA and fingerprints were on the letters mailed to Trinity Prep, and a pair of social media accounts in Butte's name that had echoed the smears against him were traced back to an internet protocol address at the tax collector's Lake Mary home. Seminole authorities later handed the case off to federal investigators, who were already probing a cryptocurrency embezzlement scheme the tax collector had carried out using funds from his public office. The smears against Butte would become the first charges against Greenberg.
I couldn't ask to be blessed with a better person to have been sitting in that seat than Detective Tirado. He did everything we reasonably could have hoped for him to do. The position he's in was a very difficult one. He is in a unit that is not normally tasked with flipping around criminal complaints and investigating who is perpetuating false reporting and blackmail and extortion efforts. That's not his unit's task. But after laying out all the background and the context for why this is probably happening, he was willing to go that extra mile, and Brian and I will forever be thankful for what Detective Tirado did.
Miller said his first encounter with Engels came months before Save Rural Seminole's founding, when he organized a community meeting in Geneva to discuss the possibility of incorporating their community in order to give locals greater control over development in their area.
And that's the meeting that Jacob Engels showed up with 2 other guys in the middle of July or August wearing flannel shirts, long sleeve shirts. And in the middle of the meeting, 2 of them took off their shirts and had, one had a swastika on the front and the other one had the Nazi SS symbols on the front, and Engels jumped up and started taking photos of them. And we ended up escorting them out. Jacob had a press pass, like a badge thing hanging around his neck. And that's when we kind of figured out that this wasn't going to be just a simple holding signs up and talking at a commission meeting. It was going to be more involved with that. Once you had people doing that kind of stuff to try to derail your meeting, it was going to be more of a problem.
The behavior Miller described, Engels bearing the trappings of a journalist but engaging in the actions of an activist and provocateur, is very much in keeping with his modus operandi. For example, he often appears publicly with members of the Proud Boys, the far-right extremist group. Sometimes he even wears their de facto uniform, a black and yellow Fred Perry polo shirt. But he has claimed he is not a member of the group, just a journalist covering them. That said, he has often crossed that already blurred line. When Enrique Tarrio, who is currently the Proud Boys leader, launched a bid for Congress in 2019, Engels issued a statement to the Washington Examiner on Tarrio's behalf. Engels is also known for stunts, often appearing at speaking events for prominent Democrats and other left-wing figures and shouting at them through a bullhorn, sometimes prompting his ejection or physical confrontations. Here's audio of him shouting over an appearance by former Attorney General Eric Holder during a campaign event for gubernatorial candidate Andrew Gillum in 2018.
It's time you denounce violence, Mr. Holder. It's time you denounce your statements about kicking your political opponents while they're down.
As ballot counting dragged on in Broward County that November, giving rise to conspiracy theories and fraud allegations, Engels donned a gray wig and a pantsuit to imitate the county's top elections official, Brenda Snipes.
Ho ho! I want my payment, Mr. Gillum.
Engels is also a close associate of Roger Stone, the self-described dirty trickster and infamous political consultant to Presidents Nixon and Trump. The Daily Beast in a headline once called Engels Roger Stone's mini-me, and the men have promoted each other's work. Here's Stone endorsing the Central Florida Post's reporting in a 2017 video for the conspiracy website InfoWars.
So, Jacob, you have been really out there in the last couple of weeks. You've broken some major stories. But what we're going to focus on today is not just the incredible stories you have broken, but how immediately in the aftermath of those journalistic breakthroughs, Facebook, Google, and the other internet giants have moved swiftly to snuff you, to cut off your public access, to bury the stories.
Engels has progressed from being a Stone admirer to a protege. Stone has in the past referred to Engels as one of his volunteers, and the two worked closely enough that Stone testified under oath in February 2019 that he had entrusted Engels with his phone and the login and password for his Instagram account. Like Engels, Stone has clear ties to the Proud Boys. The group's members have served as event security for him in the past, and after Stone's arrest in January 2019 on charges that he lied to Congress, tampered with a witness, and obstructed justice, the chant, "Roger Stone did nothing wrong," became a rallying cry for the extremist group.
Roger Stone did nothing wrong! Roger Stone did nothing wrong! Roger Stone did nothing wrong!
That's a contingent of Proud Boys chanting as they marched through downtown Orlando during a rally for then-President Donald Trump that June. On the day of Stone's arrest, Engels appeared on InfoWars with notorious conspiracist Alex Jones. The two railed against former Democratic presidential nominee Hillary Clinton in vulgar terms and called for supporters to take action against the government.
I want that frickin' whore that sold this country out to anybody that would buy us off. I want that whore indicted.
No, that disgusting fat whore Hillary Clinton needs to be in prison. If they're going to do this to Roger Stone, we must see indictments of other people. And if not, the citizens and great patriots, info warriors, freedom lovers must stand up, take to the streets, and make citizens arrests. We must hold government accountable. What happened today to Roger Stone could happen to me, could happen to you, Alex.
In July 2020, the Central Florida Post's Facebook page was erased from the social media site in a purge of accounts suspected of sharing and spreading disinformation on social media to benefit Stone and his allies. According to Graphica, one of the nation's premier social media monitoring and disinformation tracking companies, the propaganda effort utilized a network of fake accounts that boosted the Central Florida Post and other pro-Stone content on Facebook. Miller said he experienced this firsthand when Engels wrote about his arrest.
In his tactic, his MO is to write a piece, and then he had, and I'm going to guess, 8 or 10 different fake Facebook profiles, and these profiles were members of these different organizations like the Chuliota community group, the Oviedo community groups, all these different community groups. And those fake profiles would share his story, and all of these fake profiles would then like the story to get more traction with it.
Among the Central Florida Post content that was deleted in the Facebook purge of stone-linked accounts were 2 videos Engels posted about Butte in June 2020. In them, the blogger seemed, in crass terms, to make reference to the music teacher facing a sex scandal at work.
But creepy Brian Butte, who was involved in some tromboning incident over at Trinity Prep as a teacher, tromboning, we don't know what he was tromboning, but we heard there was a tromboning incident.
That was published June 20th. 3 days before Greenberg was arrested and his indictment unsealed, making public for the first time the smear letters that authorities said Greenberg mailed to Trinity. Among the Facebook users who promoted that video and others by Engels was one that used the name April Goad. According to Graphica, there was no such person. It was a dummy account meant to boost misinformation on the social network. But when other users questioned Goad's authenticity, the account had an ardent defender in Leslie A. L.A. Key, a Trump activist in Seminole who had claimed to know Goad personally. Engels is an ally and one-time business partner of Key and her husband, real estate attorney Robert Hoogland.
We're here with L.A. Key. L.A. was one of the big Trump Republican supporters in Seminole County. She actually led the Seminole for Trump.
That was Engels, clad in a Proud Boys polo, introducing Key in a 2017 Central Florida Post video. Key and Hoogland were also recipients of a contract from the tax collector's office through a company they founded within days of Greenberg taking office in 2017. Auditors who probed Greenberg's spending after he resigned found that tax collector's office staff had no idea what MAGA Advisory Services did for the $29,000 that Greenberg's office ultimately paid the company, named in apparent homage to the Donald Trump campaign slogan, "Make America Great Again." Key and Hoogland later got more work from Greenberg. Key was given a staff position and paid $105,000 in salary and benefits, while Hoogland was paid at least $11,500 in legal fees. Auditors couldn't determine what they did for that money either, and we couldn't reach them for comment. However, Hoogland gave only vague responses when confronted by Orlando's WFTV Channel 9 earlier this year.
No example of work product, including from a company called MAGA Advisory Group. Attorney Robert Hoogland is a registered agent of the business, run by his wife, Leslie Key.
So what kind of work were you doing?
She was doing consulting work.
Can you be more specific?
No.
Okay. You don't think the public has a right to know since it was paid for with tax dollars?
Well, I was consulting for the tax collector.
What type of consulting? He had a lot of consultants on the payroll.
Oh, it's political consulting.
Okay.
And for marketing.
Butte argues the payments to MAGA Advisory Services, Key, and Hoogland deserve more scrutiny and explanation, as well as other still lingering threads in the Greenberg saga. But he describes as the larger issue that Greenberg's shady behavior was able to go on for so long unchecked, as he doled out questionable contracts with taxpayer money, hired friends and relatives to cushy jobs, and, as we now know, committed numerous crimes.
As most people might think, okay, well, maybe a mistake happened and it ended up being like a financial crime. But now we see, 33 counts. I find it fascinating that my legislators in Florida haven't contacted me. I mean, people I've voted for who are in my own party didn't contact me. They still yet to this day haven't contacted. That's their job. Their job is to pay attention to local citizens and those issues that surround local citizens. And this is a real issue.
Since Greenberg signed his plea deal, Butte has spoken out about the need for greater oversight of tax collectors and other constitutional officers, over whom city and county officials hold little authority to enforce accountability. Baer says he's amazed that officials in Tallahassee haven't taken the opportunity to reassure citizens that another Joel Greenberg won't be tolerated.
We don't know why the state of Florida is not providing oversight into the constitutional officers, and because they're not providing oversight, the constitutional officers have basically their own little fiefdom to run whatever they want out of there. crimes, immoral things, questionable things, and a lot of them think nobody will ever see because the state of Florida isn't watching. And so Brian's been basically throwing softballs to Tallahassee. Show us, tell us how, provide us assurance that these sorts of corrupt acts, schemes, roles of corrupt acts are not happening elsewhere. And all he's heard back is silence, and the silence is deafening.
Butte says he won't accept that silence as an answer.
So the state they have to address this. There's no way I'm going to allow them to get away with not addressing this, because we don't want any more actors like this in the future. And we don't know if there are actors who have been acting in the other 66 counties. It's very, very possible. You know, these people took oaths. They took oaths. I didn't take an oath. They took oaths. So it's time to act upon that oath.
That's the end of this episode. We hope you've enjoyed it. It was produced by the Sentinel's Wesley Alden and featured reporting from Martin Comas and Jason Garcia. Going forward, we'll continue to bring you the latest developments in this saga as Greenberg's sentencing looms August 19th, as well as episodes exploring aspects of the Sentinel's ongoing investigation into the former tax collector and his allies in Seminole County and Tallahassee. Thanks for listening. Please rate the podcast, subscribe, and tell your friends. And continue to follow our coverage of this saga at orlandosentinel.com/Greenberg.